are we 100% confident that this BFO data was generated in an innocent way? Meaning whoever, like, because you have to understand that if Zaharie Ahmad Shah took the plane, the captain had taken the plane in order to commit suicide, there's no way he could have known about BTO or BFO data. He wouldn't have. Even people in the, because it's a very arcane thing within the world of satellite communications. Like you would have to work in satellite communications to know that these are parameters that are important in keeping up your network. It's like a part of network maintenance. It's very technical. It's very arcane. And the BTO data actually, we keep talking about Air France 447. They had only started recording BTO data within the previous year because they realized that it would have been useful potentially in an Air France 447 type of situation. So Air France 447 in a way like really inspired MH370 in some ways. So I was wondering, I was like, oh my God, there really is. Another thing that really struck me as uncanny was that there was a whole bunch of things that had to be true in order for any of this to be possible. Again, we talked about it had to be a Thales box, not a Rockwell box.
Yes.
It had to be a Boeing airplane, not an Airbus, because only Boeing has an accessible hatch to the electronics bay. It had to be a 777 and not any other kind of Boeing airplane because the 777 was the only fly-by-wire airplane. The 787 is also fly-by-wire, but it doesn't have an accessible hatch. It also required that Malaysian Airlines be subscribed to the lowest level.
And all these things line up.
And all of these, so if you take, and another one is that the two routes had to be north and south because the satellite wobble only discriminates between north and south. It doesn't discriminate from east and west. Also, to discriminate north and south, it would be helpful if it was on the equator. This plane disappeared very close to the equator.
Why would it? Oh, because of the positioning of the satellite.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Got it.
Another thing is that you would want to have your mirror flight going over open ocean. Now remember, this plane was originally flying east. If you wanted to just stitch it into the ocean, you could fly east and go to the Marianas Trench. You'd never be found there. But instead it went back. Why did it go west? So all of these things lined up to make this scenario possible, which itself to me seemed uncanny, right? But did I know that it happened? Did I know it's even possible? I mean, I speculate that if you could get into this box, then you could make this false trail of breadcrumbs. But did I know that it was actually possible? I mean, I didn't know why it wasn't possible, but it was only a suspicion. And so what I did was I thought, okay, if it went north, where would it go? It would go basically over India, over Nepal, over the Himalayas, over far western China, into Tajikistan, into Kazakhstan, and it would have wound up in central Kazakhstan, a very underpopulated kind of place.
Landed with Borat.
It would, yeah. I mean, Borat is actually not really anything like, has nothing to do with like actual Kazakhstan.
I know.
But yeah, I mean, more interestingly, it's where Russia's space program is. So Russia has, you know how we have Guantanamo Bay? It's like in this sort of hostile country, but it's like ours by treaty. They have a circle that's like 60 miles across in Kazakhstan.
Interesting.
That belongs to them because that's where they launch people into space. And they were launching Americans into space too because our space shuttle blew up and we didn't have a replacement for it. So there happened to be a big runway in a very remote part of this base that like there's nobody lives near it or anything. And so you could, if you flew there and it would be like an hour before dawn, you could like refuel it and fly it off and you'd be good. So I said to myself, okay, so if this went to Kazakhstan, you've got a very short list of potential perpetrators because you would have to be, like we talked about, like infinitely sophisticated, like infinitely clever and crafty and ruthless. And you're winding up in Kazakhstan. So who like is allied with Kazakhstan? Kazakhstan is a client state of Russia.
Yeah.
So who's on the plane? Well, there was a Russian sitting about 12 feet from the hatch in first class. And there were two Ukrainian guys sitting under the satellite data unit.
Like
SATCOM.
Friendly to Russia Ukrainian guys? Or,
So
you
this-
know, that's kind of
This was at a
an important
time-
distinction.
It is an important distinction. And it's confusing. I mean, it's something that I think a lot of Ukrainians have had to explain. A lot of people in Ukraine speak Russian as a primary language. A lot speak Ukrainian. The fact that you speak Russian does not mean that you love Putin. Doesn't mean that you're culturally any different from anybody else. But when this happened, you mentioned you were in Italy at the time, and that what people were obsessed with was
Crimea.
Putin's annexation of Crimea. Now, how did Putin do it? Now, Putin, it's important to realize, is a spook. He is a former KGB officer.
Right.
And he looks at the world through.
Yeah, you got me for a minute there. I was like, "Where's this going?" How does he? So he does things in spooky ways, right? He was famous for. I mean, this is alleged, but I think it's widely believed that when he first came to power, he wanted to go to war with Chechnya. He did.
And so he blew up like
Russia. I had David Satter in here, the guy who broke the story. He's been in here twice.
Before the KGB, there was the NKVD in the 30s that was responsible for murdering hundreds of thousands of people.
Like the pogroms and stuff?
No. Pogroms were ethnic, anti-Jewish for the most part. Riots.
Right.
No, this was the Great Terror during the 1930s that Stalin launched against real and imagined opponents in order to bring the country completely to its knees.
If you read David's books and look at the evidence he has, 100%.
Okay. So here's a guy who's not afraid to blow up or kill hundreds of citizens for the purpose of like whatever arcane purpose he feels like might be merited. He takes over Crimea not by rolling tanks over the border, but these guys show up, little green men. They're not wearing any insignia. They claim to be local separatists or something.
Not aliens, to be clear. You got to be careful in here, you know?
Yeah, exactly. But... yeah, I mean, but it's like that kind of like, we don't know what reality is. They are little green men. They are like from another dimension. We don't know who they are. They could be anybody. And this kind of like state of confusion and denial and crazy stories and theories and like people coming out of the woodwork. And so you don't know which way is up. And so these guys they speak Russian. They were Soviet Army veterans, which doesn't mean anything because everybody of that age group had to serve in the military.
Right.
But they're like kind of stocky looking guys and their family doesn't want to talk about them. And they were supposedly on this, but that's a whole nother thing. This is what I think you're starting to understand like why I had to do an open-ended podcast about this mystery.
Oh, yeah.
Because it like you said, layer upon layer upon layer.
Yeah, I think I told you on the phone, I said, I don't know how many of these you're going to do, but this is hundreds of hours potentially. If you're really gonna go through every nook and cranny and possibility. I mean, the things we've been talking about today, and I apologize to people who wanted me to ask all these questions in the middle. I'd be cutting you off every 2 sentences if we went, there's some things I have asked to clarify on, but that's why you're doing the podcast where you can bite size, for 30, 40 minutes, each one of these things individually. So today you're doing a good job with the overlay.
Thank you. So in June of 2014, 3 months into this mystery, I'm like, okay, who are these Russians? I just call them the Russians, even though 2 of them are Russian-speaking Ukrainians from Odessa. So what are they doing on the plane? I hire researchers, freelancers, one in Irkutsk, where the Russian in the first class is from, and I hire somebody to do some inquiries for me in Odessa, in Ukraine, where the 2 furniture salesmen are from.
And who, like, when you say you hire someone, like some kid on the street looking for $10, or like an actual reporter?
I didn't know how to do it. I had never done it before, and so I have a friend at the New York Times, and I was like, "Can you recommend a good person in Irkutsk?" And the Times, being who they are, have a very extensive network of fixers and freelancers and people who can.
And they got some fixers in there, huh?
Yeah, so we need some fixing, and so this really fantastic person was working on it for me, and I was like, okay, we're gonna figure out if the Russians are behind this. So these people were busy at work when I get a call in July 29th, 2014. Was it July 29th? It was somewhere in July, 17th maybe. Anyway, I got the date wrong already. I get a call. Can you come into CNN and talk about the Malaysian Airlines 777 that was shot down in Ukraine?
That's right.
And I was like, I think you mean Malaysia. And they're like, no, this is a different one. And I was like, holy shit.
That one they did do.
Because I'd been thinking like that maybe this whole thing is about Ukraine. Because so everyone was like, well, what's the point? Why would you steal a plane and take it to Kazakhstan? And there's, again, no good motives really. But the thing that one effect that this MH370 had was that people stopped talking, certainly in America, maybe not in Rome. But in the United States, people immediately stopped paying attention to Crimea and started talking about MH370. CNN talked about nothing else for like 2 months.
I believe that in America. I wasn't in America at the time. But yeah.
Every time, and it wasn't out of nefariousness or whatever, but like the fact is that every time CNN tried to talk about anything else, their ratings cratered.
Oh, funny how that happens.
Funny how that works.
Yeah.
So people were legit obsessed with this.
Mm.
And it's all they wanted to talk about. And so it kind of made sense that there was a nexus between, you know, this spooky espionage leader of Russia and this sort of like difficult to parse, kind of nonsensical action that involved like killing a lot of civilians.
Do you think, like immediately one of the major issues I'd have with him being involved with this kind of thing, though, is the fact that I don't remember the exact number, but a significant number of people on the jet were from China,
right?
Which is his next door neighbor, who he's not trying to make enemies with. And I think there were only 3 Americans or something on this thing.
Yeah.
Like if you took this down, it's a potential China problem for him.
So, listen, there's actually lots of problems with the what I call the spoof theory, the idea that somebody tampered with this data and the plane really went north.
Right.
There's actually a lot of problems with it. It's not a good theory in many regards, but it answers questions like, how come the plane isn't on the southern seabed? How come the SDU was turned back on? How come there was no floating debris found for the first year and a half? Things like this. And so I'm not trying to tell you that this is a perfect theory that doesn't have problems. And so, yeah, but the question is like, how can we explain the data that we have? And as time went by, when I first, so I waited some time. I worked on it. I floated it past some people. I was very not confident. Everybody was saying that the plane went to the southern Indian Ocean. There was no doubt that it went to the southern Indian Ocean. So I was the only person saying that. Now, there was a whole lot of other sort of stuff that was coming out of left field. That was like, there was a lot of sort of what they called the hero pilot theory, which is that the plane had caught fire, and it was the hero pilots were trying to save it, and then they succumbed, and so the plane flew south. There was people. I mean, if you watch the Netflix documentary, you have people like Florence to Changy who were saying that the Americans shot it down. There was
we'll come back to that. Yeah.
There was a lot of discussion about supposed eyewitness accounts, one of which was by some islanders in the Maldives who claimed that they saw this plane go overhead, and then a lot of people were like, it went to Diego Garcia, which is a U.S. British base, and so there was like all kind, but there was no evidence for any of these things. And so they were just kind of being thrown out there. And so this, I would consider this sort of part of the like sort of a fog of I mean, you could call it, let's just call it misinformation for the sake of ease. So I eventually came forward in early 2014, and I said, look, if you don't find this plane in the southern seabed, there is a possible explanation that I'm going to run past you. It may be, it's physically possible. I don't have evidence that this happened. I can't prove to you that this happened, but it seems to be that there is a physical possibility that you could do this thing that would make it seem like the plane went south when it really went north. This was widely dismissed as another conspiracy theory. It was like put on par with Diego Garcia, because we've been talking now for a while, right? A long time. Many light years more time than you can spend talking to Richard Quest on CNN, right? What I've been trying to tell you about Doppler precompensation is not something I can get across in a 2.5 minute hit on CNN. So there's no way that I can say my idea and also justify it in a short clip. So basically, I'm going on and people are saying, so Jeff, you believe that the plane was stolen by Putin. And I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa. No, don't.
Can we not start
there.
with that? I know that's good for
It's
ratings.
like I'm trying to say that like that the evidence is puzzling, and there may be an alternate explanation that we really need to consider. And so the disappointment for me isn't that people don't immediately believe this idea. The disappointment for me is that the officials have refused to even acknowledge that this observation has been made.
Is it also possible, though, because if it's provable that it could have gone either way, potentially, which I think you have pretty good evidence for that it's possible. Maybe the pilot, and I don't think the pilot was suicidal, I agree with you, but for the sake of argument, let's say for a minute he was.
Right.
Maybe you want to go sightseeing north as his last descent. You know what I mean? And then we never even looked there because the whole search went into the sea, and it went into some nondescript area. Maybe it wasn't even Kazakhstan. Maybe it was somewhere else, east or west or whatever. Crashed into a mountain. No one ever heard from it.
So
possible.
So basically, I said there's two possibilities. Either the BFO data is innocent, and it was generated as a result of things that people did who didn't know how the BFO worked, or it was tampered with, which requires such a level of sophistication that it would have to be a state-level actor, because you would have to understand not only how to fly a plane, not only how air traffic control works, how satellite communications work, but essentially you have to have a sophisticated electronic warfare capability, because what you're doing is something that is very arcane in any corner of the world except for electronic warfare, which we can talk about later or more or now if you want. But it's a mindset that a pilot would certainly not have. It requires very specific skills and very specific outlook.
Can you explain? I mean, you're using the word warfare,
right?
So we do got to dig into that a little bit. What's the connotation there?
So there's an entire field of the defense industry called electronic warfare, and it started with the development of radar during World War II. And so radar is a way that you can see where your enemy's aircraft are. They can see yours, and so you get once you develop detection measures, you have to develop countermeasures, or it behooves you to develop countermeasures. One of the earliest one was they would fly these giant bomber formations. At the British would do it at night, and they would just dispense chaff, like little fluttering pieces of tinfoil, like they throw in at New Year's in Times Square. What's that stuff called? Confetti.
Yeah.
It's like metal confetti, and you strew this, and because so when you beam your radar waves at this cloud of confetti, it can't see. It's like a shroud, right?
Yes.
And so as the decades go by, there's all kinds of crazy things that you can do. And one I think that's worth talking about, it's pretty cool, which is, so you're sending out your radar, and we talked about Doppler before, right? So if you're flying towards me, and I shine to use this example of 100, I'm sending my thing out at a frequency of 100. It's hitting you, you're coming towards me fast, so it's coming back to me at 110. Right?
Yes.
And so what I can do is, I don't want to see birds. I don't want to see clouds. I'm only worried about invading fighter jets. Okay. So I have a thing called a gate, a Doppler gate. And basically, I'm not going to look at anything that's under 105.
It's like a noise gate. It's the same concept.
Yeah. Exactly. And so you're flying at me at 110. You're flying at me. It's bounding about 110. I see it. You're the only thing that I see because you're the only one who's moving fast. You stand out like a sore thumb, right? Okay, now your guys on the other side know that I'm doing this Doppler gating. And you're like, how do we avoid this? And we were talking about Doppler precompensation before. You do a version of that. You say, okay, I'm going to measure what your radar is sending out, and I'm going to blip you back at like a really strong, like 100. I'm going to precompensate. So you think I'm not shining at 110, I'm shining at 100, and I get like out of the gate, something like that. And so this kind of Doppler spoofing is basically something that's been going on since the 50s. There was a famous case during the Cuban Missile Crisis where the Cubans were, expecting to be invaded by the Americans. And the Americans sent up these balloons, I think, out of a submarine or something. And the balloons were transmitting this Doppler shifted radar frequencies. So the Cubans were like, oh my God, there's like a whole squadron of American planes coming in. And this is in the 50s. So fast forward now 60 years. And this is like, so when I talk about Doppler precompensation to 99.99% of humanity, they're like, that is the craziest, most arcane thing I've ever heard.
Around.
But if you work in the electronic warfare business, you're like, yeah, Doppler spoofing.
Forever.
That's what we do. We wake up and we have Wheaties and Doppler precompensation.
Real quick, I just got to go to the bathroom. We'll be right back. All right, we're back. So just staying on this whole electrical hatch. What's the official term again? Electrical?
It's called the EE bay,
bay.
E/E. It's probably simpler to call it just the electronics bay.
Got it. So the way that you had laid it out was that, and I'll have you kind of explain the whole thing, but this Russian who was 12 feet away from the bay could have gone in there and effectively could have, through certain measures, had the ability to take control of the cockpit and therefore the plane. In the documentary, you were telling me this off camera, in the documentary and also publicly, guys like Mike Exner were refuting that and saying there's no way this could have happened.
Right.
You're not saying it did happen. You're saying we need to look at the possibility, and you think it hasn't been proven to you that you couldn't do this definitively. Am I saying that correctly?
I think the question that search officials have to address is there any possible way that this data could have arisen from a different way? Is there a non-innocent way? And they've never even addressed it. And so I guess the drum I guess I've been beating is, okay, listen, I understand why you think it went south. I think it's important that the public understand why you think it went south. But I think it's also important to interrogate whether it's possible that there's another explanation. And essentially, I would say that I raised the possibility that the seabed search might fail at a time when no other person
was willing to do that,
even could entertain the possibility. And I was kind of ridiculed at the time. But I thought, well, I'm going to get my satisfaction when they search the seabed and it's not there, because people will say, well, we didn't find it. What about that guy back in early 2015 who said that it might not be there? Surely they'll be knocking down my door.
Yeah.
Which that's not what happened, actually, because people were like, well, we're sure it's there. We just didn't find it. So that's another area that I was wrong about.
But as far as going down there, what would that take? You laid out some of this in the documentary, but guy goes down into the bay. What happens next?
Okay, so you have a particular model of plane where there's a hatch that you can pull back a carpet, pull the lever and go down, and now you have access to the computers that control the flight surfaces of the plane. And there's a kind of principle in cybersecurity that if you have possession of a machine, you can, in principle, get that machine to do anything that it's physically capable of. You have it, you own it, it's in your possession. You can do what you can make it dance to your tune. And
is there like a computer system down there with a keyboard, or is it all electrical like boxes?
There is a system called, I believe, PMAT, which is a keyboard that you plug in. It's not to take over the plane. It's so that usually ground personnel, maintenance people can get in and check the status of various things. You can upload software into it. Some of these things can only be done when the plane is on the ground with weight on wheels, it's called. So, could you spoof a weight on wheels signal? I don't know. I don't really know how any of this would work in detail. But what I'm saying is, if you imagine somebody who is incredibly sophisticated and they own your box, then I think you should have less than 100% confidence that they aren't going to make it do what they want. There's, I'm sure some of your viewers and listeners, are familiar with cryptocurrency. There's this idea that if you have the key to this Bitcoin amount, you should not store it online.
Not your keys, not your crypto. Yeah.
Right? Not your keys, not your crypto. And so if I have it stored on my phone and I hand it to you, and you're an Israeli cybersecurity firm, do I still own this Bitcoins? Maybe not.
Yeah.
So it's a principle in crypto security that if you want to really be certain, you write it down like in paper, pen and ink on paper.
Yes.
And you put it like in a safe, in a locked safe, and you don't tell it to your wife/girlfriend or anybody. So we're positing that this in this particular, uniquely. This model of plane, you can go down and be physically present with this computer. I don't know how so people have definitely said this is impossible. A well-known aviation writer named William Langewiesche wrote an article for The Atlantic in which he said that this is impossible for so many reasons that I can't get into it.
Mm.
I was like, just give me one. So yeah, it's a completely unresolved issue. I can neither give you a specific mechanism by which it can be done, nor can anyone give me a specific reason why it can't be done. You're just having people making assertions.
Understood. So when you were looking at this and then taking it to the next level with Russia's involvement, your idea, to bring it full circle, was that because there was so much heat on Putin at the time due to the whole Crimea thing, everyone paying attention to that something like this would have provided an extremely welcome distraction for that story to kind of die off a little bit. Is that fair to say?
I would in response to that question, which is a question I got a lot. In fact, I would say it was the number one question that everyone always asked anytime I started talking about Russia and spoofing,
right, is
that I'm trying to explain what might have happened to the plane. Like what was like why Putin wanted to do it, or what he would have benefited from it, or whether it would have been a good decision or a bad decision. I'm just trying to say, is it physically possible? Should we entertain the possibility that this happened? I'm not trying. My job is not to make it seem like an attractive prospect that every right-minded citizen should go to as immediately as possible. What I'm saying is it conceivable that this could happen? Is it physically possible? And then, sure, let's match up. Does it match up with something that Vladimir Putin would do? Well, in 2014, there was a country that was known to destroy Malaysian Airlines 777's. This was Russia.
Yeah.
So I sometimes like to tell the analogy of, imagine you're a chicken farmer, right? And you've had a chicken farm for many years and you've never lost a single chicken. And then one day you wake up and there's a bloody, mangled chicken carcass on your front yard. Okay. And you don't have no idea who did it. Absolutely none whatsoever. And then 4 months later, you find a fox jumping over a fence with a chicken in its mouth. Right?
There you go.
Don't know who killed your first chicken. But somewhere on your list of suspects, there has to be a fox, right?
And it's not like you really have a list of suspects outside of that, because we're talking about one other plane that we know they shot down.
Right.
Now, as a little bit of a challenge point there, the context was different. I mean, it was obviously horrible what they did to it, and they never admitted to it, the one that they shot down over Ukraine.
Right.
But it was allegedly shot down in what was viewed as an ongoing, I guess, small war between the two countries going on, and I guess they might have thought it was some sort of military jet and then shot it down. It was commercial, whereas the one that we're talking about is in a neutral area of the world away from there, not involving necessarily, outside of the three passengers, Russians and Ukrainians. It's all a bunch of other people.
There are many differences between the case. However, it is an uncanny coincidence that these two planes went down 4.5 months apart. They were both Malaysian Airlines 777's, of which there were only 16 in the world out of 20-some thousand commercial aircraft. Yes. And so
there's only 16 777's in the world?
Well, after MH17, there were 14, because 2 were destroyed in the span of these. So
I didn't know that.
It was an extremely unlikely event. And also, it was really quite striking to me that when MH17 was shot down, there was I'm going to say retired in quotation marks, GRU, Russian military intelligence officer named Igor Girkin, who said, "Oh, we shot down. Hey, hooray for us! We shot down a military plane belonging to those dastardly Ukrainians.
Whoops!
So hooray for us!" And then it was discovered, oh, it wasn't a Ukrainian military plane. It was a Malaysian civilian plane. So everyone's like, "Oh, look, they gave themselves away." Well, listen, Gherkin is a Russian military intelligence, right? We talked about Putin himself is a spy. Right.
Yeah.
You're talking about You're talking about people who's wake up every morning. Again, they have their Wheaties and they commit mindfuckery. Right.
Yes.
That's what they do. And so you're going to take this guy's you're going to take his explanation like face value. This plane. So everyone thinks that
this guy right here on the screen.
That's the man.
Got it.
He's in jail right now, not in Netherlands, where he was convicted of mass murder for killing all the people aboard MH17, but in Russia because he criticized Vladimir Putin.
Ooh, that's a big no-no there.
It's tough. It's tough to be a hustler.
You were doing so well shooting down planes. Now you're going to prison.
So Russian military intelligence becomes a very interesting suspect. These are people the little green men, the use of intelligence for military purposes to try to achieve your goals. It's going to be a busy couple of years for the GRU because they're going to get up to all kinds of hijinks, which we can talk about. Some of them are very relevant to America.
Can you talk about those?
Sure.
No.
But before I do, let me just put a cap on this MH17 business. Initially, it was accepted by all right-thinking people that this was a mistake, that the Russians had taken this piece of equipment that didn't have a full radar, and it wasn't able to identify its targets. And so when they shot kind of mistakenly at something that they thought was something, and it was something else, and it was all terrible, but it was let's call it an honest mistake. Well, one of the really fascinating things about this case is that technology is so important, and technology is changing, and new things are happening, and new innovations are being developed as it's unfolding. And it changes the nature of the game. And what happened was an unemployed guy in the UK named Elliot Higgins is sitting in his underwear on his sofa watching coverage of Syria. And there's some suspicion that the Assad regime is poisoning its own people with gas, right? And so he develops this thing called open source intelligence, and he's sifting through stuff that people put online to try to gather and try to piece together what's happening. Fast forward to MH17 getting shot down, and his team of volunteers from around the world, much like the IG that we were talking about earlier, people are kind of pitching in and lending their expertise and saying, okay, we're going to look at dash cams and other information that people are putting forward, and we're going to be able to match the movements of this rocket launcher as it moves across the eastern part of Ukraine. It's been sent in. They're able to identify the military unit that belongs to. They're able to identify under whose command it was operating. So this is not a militia that had managed to capture a piece of equipment that they didn't understand how to use. This was a regular Russian military unit operating under the command of GRU, the military intelligence. And so they drive this thing into a field. They sit under a busy international air route, and they're watching plane after plane after plane after plane go by for several hours, and then they pick MH17 out of the sky and shoot it down. They're later convicted. The people in charge of this operation are later convicted in absentia in
The Hague,
the Netherlands. Yeah. So was it accidental? I mean, some people still, even in Bellingcat, say that it was a mistake. But the thing that I push back against that is a modern military air defense system isn't just a rocket launcher with a radar next to it. It's a distributed system in which all of the sensors are interconnected, and all of the rockets and other assets are also interconnected. So it's a distributed system. And just because this thing was in a field dozens or hundreds of miles away from whoever was in charge of it, one of the main things you learn when you study to be a anti-aircraft missile operator, especially one that can reach 70,000 feet, is you do not fire it unless your officer tells you to do it. Right. So I have a red button in front of me. I don't just push that red button ever, unless the lieutenant, who's my boss, tells me, and the lieutenant doesn't tell me to do it unless his boss tells him.
Yes.
So there's like multiple levels up, because obviously we have the Vincennes case in the United States, where a U.S. naval ship shot down an Iranian airliner during a time of heightened tension in the Gulf.
When was that? Roughly. Do we have
90s, I want to say.
Vincennes, Iran Air Flight 655, is that it?
That's it.
1988.
Whoa, I don't know about this. Okay, so what happened here?
Well, this is an example of, if you're a little careless with your anti-aircraft missiles, it's easy to shoot down a civilian airliner. There was more recently, actually a Ukrainian plane was shot down in... was that in Iran as well? Boy, the brain holes are opening up. This is what you want to avoid. So this was in the Persian Gulf. There was tensions between the United States and Iran, and an Iranian passenger flight flew off, and it flew towards a U.S. naval ship, which misunderstood it to be an attacking Iranian plane.
So they shot it down.
So basically the claim about MH17 was that it was a similar kind of scenario where they just mistook the plane. The difference between MH17 and this is that, there really was like a shooting war about to erupt. Obviously there was a shooting war in Ukraine, but that's a long story.
Right.
But this really was flying right at, it was uniquely flying at this plane, whereas MH17 was one of many, many planes that were flying innocently along this route.
But to go specifically to what you were saying there, they would have, chances are they would have had to deliberately pick this out, and it wasn't an accident. Are there any, I know less about MH17 with the case on the ground, are there any decently evidence-backed theories as to people who were on that plane, or some sort of backwards-ass logic behind why Russia would have wanted to purposely shoot it down?
Well, it's difficult to... It's so now we're getting into like this sort of hybrid warfare talk. We're talking about making moves, and you're not really clear why you're doing it. And I mean, was the uncanny echo between MH17 and MH370 intentional? I mean, were they trying to send a signal? If MH370 was the most sophisticated attack imaginable, MH17 was like hitting someone's skull with a sledgehammer.
Right. Yeah. Straightforward.
Which again is something that Russians have been known to do. But so it's again, it's not probative, but it's just one of these weird things. Like, is there a link between these two incidents that happened so closely together and were so unlikely? But what you have in the wake of MH17 also is, on the one hand, a whole bunch of Russian skullduggery, where Russians are doing these, they seem to have launched a kind of multi-front war against the West. And in the context of this, I'll try to keep it as brief as possible, but basically, Putin was consolidating his hold on Russia, and he was trying to promote a vision of himself as this kind of czar who could make the empire great again. And he felt it was an existential threat to him for Ukraine, which had been under the rule of a Putin ally, to go into a pro-Western democracy, which had just happened in sort of late 2013, early 2014.
Yes, with Maidan and all that.
The Maidan, right. Color revolutions and all this. So he felt like a red line had been crossed, that the West was impinging on what they call the near abroad. It's a bit like the Monroe Doctrine in the United States in the early 19th century. It's like, you cannot, this is our area, you can't act in this area.
He's concerned they're going to join NATO and stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. And also just provide a model for how to live. I mean, he wanted, I was talking to a friend of mine who's kind of an expert in this area, and he was saying that Putin's worst nightmare is for Russians to look out the window at their next door neighbor and see that things are better over there where there's liberal democracy. So he wants liberal democracy to fail. And so you have Russian involvement in things like they're assassinating dissidents.
Yes.
There's a really interesting documentary that was made about the doping scandal.
Oh, yeah, the Icarus one?
Icarus.
Oh, my
right?
God. It's one of the best documentaries ever made.
I mean, it's absolutely fascinating because the parallel the relevance that struck me was that all of the experts thought that these urine collection vials were untamperable. They were made in Switzerland by the experts, and you cannot tamper with them. And the only reason that it's emerged is because this guy basically came forward and said, yeah, I ran the program and we did it. And I'm going to tell you exactly how we did it. And I watched that documentary and I'm like, damn, I wish somebody would come forward like that.
Oh, my God. How perfect was that? That fell in that dude's lap, in Brian Fogel's lap when that guy came in.
Right.
It's like that's one of those documentaries where the universe just wanted it to happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
Crazy.
And it makes some of us envious that he had that stroke of luck but the lesson is you think you're so much smarter than the most dangerous belief that you can hold is that you are much smarter than your adversary and your adversary could never outwit you. And that we talked about measures and countermeasures. To believe that your enemy can't provide a countermeasure to you is foolish, very, very dangerous. And so the GRU gets involved in tampering with Brexit. They got the Fancy Bear hack. They took the DNC servers. GRU, same people.
Yeah, I had Andy Greenberg in here to talk about that. He wrote the book Sandworm, which goes through.
He turns around, goes into the master bed.
GRU team 77455 or 445, one of them. But yeah, I mean it's pretty crazy, and so that's the world we're living in though now too, where you can electronically create chaos around the world from a little office somewhere.
I have an article that ran on January 2nd, I think, in New York Magazine about electronic warfare against civil aviation. And now there's multiple areas in the world right now where there is spoofing going on, where GPS signals are being tampered with. And the result is that these civilian airliners are going off track. Their sort of navigational systems are, hacking is too strong of a word, but basically these signals are being altered. In many cases, it's part of air defense. It's like a defense against drones. In other cases, we might not know exactly what the purpose of this is, but but electronic warfare is now in the realm of civilian aviation.
Yeah, my friend Sean Ryan, when I had him on the podcast.
When you're in Baghdad in that time period, you could just hear the car bombs going off all day, all night, hear the gunshots, hear the gunfights, and it was just bombs, terrorists, suicide bombers, all the time. People coming back all f***ed up, seeing these vehicles getting blown up, seeing what's left of them, if anything. I mean, it was... This guy died, this guy died, this guy died, this guy died, and that's why we were so busy. We were killing these guys that were making the bombs, we were killing the guys that were planting the bombs, we were killing the guys that were detonating the bombs, and it was saving American lives.
He talks he talks a lot about something that's also a passion of mine, which is the scare of the power grids.
Right.
And how vulnerable that is. One of the things Andy Greenberg had talked about in Sandworm that scared the shit out of me, that I've been talking about on this podcast now for 3 years, is Russia was running in 2014, 2015, like December 2015 especially. They were running basically like dummy hack attacks just to like test what they could do.
Right.
And they were shutting down for hours at a time the Kiev power system.
Right.
And it's like, dude, if you have governments around the world who could hack in and create a mass outage on a power grid, do you know? I mean, that would the damage that could cause is monumental.
Well, I think if you talk to cybersecurity experts, and you clearly do a lot, we're all doing it. I mean,
Yes.
I'm sure the United States is doing it as well.
Absolutely.
China recently, according to the Washington Post, was hacking into systems in, I think it was a power grid in Hawaii or something. This kind of stuff goes on a lot. And the goal isn't necessarily to take down the power. I mean, China isn't our adversary right now. They could be. I mean, and you know the way these countries, the intelligence services work. It's like England is our best friend, but do you think we don't spy on them too?
Oh, of course. Yeah. Yeah. There's no such thing as friends with espionage.
Right. And so, listen, civil aviation is infrastructure. It's a form of transportation. It's that's the one. Water utility. Sure.
In China, we have the article that you were just talking to on the screen.
Texas. Oh my gosh.
Okay. Interesting. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, but so if you're in an environment in which it's a multilateral world where many people have this kind of espionage, hacking capability, and they're always looking to have potential leverage on each other, aviation is a part of that. Aviation is infrastructure. And there's an important point I think I want to make. Historically, civilian transport is sacred to a certain extent. Like, you know, when the Lusitania was sunk, that really drove us into World War I because you can't sink civilian ships. And similarly, you know, whatever's going on the ground, it's been kind of accepted that aviation is like a separate world and it doesn't get touched. This is why MH17 caused so much surprise, because even though it was flying over a war zone, they thought, well, the war's on the ground and we're in the air. There have been multiple incidents where the sacrosanctity of aviation has been breached, I would say. And one of them was an incident, and this is another one maybe you could call. Oh, that's the article I was talking about. Air travel is not ready for electronic warfare.
This is the one you wrote in January.
And I don't mention it in this article, but clearly what I'm thinking is, was MH370 the first example of what we now know to be a trend of countries using the techniques and technologies of electronic warfare against civilian aviation? Again, it's no longer as sacrosanct as it once was.
Sure.
You have, and I can't cite you chapter and verse on this, maybe you can pull it up, but there was a case where a Belarusian dissident was pulled off a Ryanair flight that was flying over Belarus. It wasn't going to or from Belarus, but they basically said, you have to land. And the pilot was like, I don't want to land. And they sent up a fighter. Yeah, so this plane was flying innocently in international airspace, and they forced it down and pulled the dissident off, and he's still in jail.
Belarus forced it down. Oh, whoa.
So Belarus is obviously a close client state of Russia.
Yeah.
And then another example.
What's that guy's? Poroshenko?
Ramen.
Did I make that up?
Right. No, I think you're right.
The president?
Right.
You know.
But so then another example I would give is the shoot down of Prigozhin's plane. Prigozhin was obviously somebody who had gotten on Putin's wrong side.
Yeah.
And as with Igor Girkin, you don't necessarily want to be on Putin's wrong side.
That guy looked just like Mike Ehrmantraut from what's it called, Breaking Bad.
Right.
Every time I saw Prigozhin, I thought like Mike was going to be like, "Here we go again."
Well, so everyone's like, Prigozhin reached a deal with Putin. So he tried to stage a coup d'etat.
Yes. That was what, June? Is that right? May, June?
I have no idea. It's
2023? Whatever, it was last year.
But, you know, if you would strike at the king, you'd better kill him. And
come at the king, you best not miss.
That's right. So Prigozhin's plane gets shot down, or had a very unfortunate mechanical accident.
Yes. Unfortunate.
So much unfortunate. So again, we've seen this again and again, where this thing that was unthinkable in March of 2014 is becoming less unthinkable.
Yes. Now, when you see something like that, though, at least, you know, Prigozhin's plane going down, he's an active military type because he ran a mercenary group within a country actively at war. And I mean, it's Russia too. Like you said, all bets are off. But your point is taken that we do have with our interconnected world, we have some very blurred lines about what types of, I don't want to say things are on the table, but what types of things countries may be capable of that shouldn't be on the table. I mean, that one about Belarus pulling a plane onto the ground and yanking a guy, and that's not even shooting down a plane and killing people.
Right.
That's interesting, though.
They had no business tampering with that plane.
Yeah.
So to give you some context, when it was June of 2014 and I was starting to think about this stuff, I didn't know that this was right. But what terrified me was the possibility that it was right. Because if MH370 was this like almost inconceivably sophisticated attack, it raised the question of like what was next, like what would come next. And all the things that I was most afraid of happened.
Like what?
Well, the Fancy Bear attack being the worst. I mean, basically, you have the United States media reporting that Hillary Clinton's emails, yada, yada, yada. So the entire 2016 election gets to be about all this stuff that was basically put there by the GRU.
Mm.
And we are dealt with the consequences of that. And now, to this day, I mean, Russia is still pulling all of these hijinks. There's like, then they invaded, then they did a full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the horrors, the hundreds of thousands of people dead. We are in a death match for democracy versus totalitarianism. And these guys are absolutely ruthless, and I think smarter, apparently, than us, because I feel like they are carrying out these things in a way that we seem unable to prepare ourselves for.
Not to underestimate them. I do try to be careful with that. But like, you know, Ukraine is, unfortunately, you talk to everyone on the ground, they're not really in a position to win this war. That said, we would have thought Russia would bowl over Ukraine and be in Odessa in like 2 days.
Everyone thought it was going to be a 3-day war.
Right. And they have not, like, to the credit of the Ukrainians on the ground, they have not done that. Like, and not to discredit Ukraine as a country, but like, y'all can't even beat Ukraine. There's a part of me that goes, okay, maybe they're not, like, I know who Putin is as a person. I know who those oligarchs are as people. There's not an argument of like, oh, maybe they're not that bad. They're bad. But like, maybe a country with the GDP of Italy isn't such the problem that I once thought it was. I mean, I thought, in all fairness, like, this is something, I was one of these people for years kind of like, oh my God, we got to look at this Russia thing, and no one would listen. And now everyone's listening about it. And now I'm kind of like, yeah, they're a problem. But also, who's going to replace him? Like, I feel like they're going to be as bad as he is, you know? I
mean, I don't disagree with you, but I sort of feel like if you were in sort of the summer of 1944 saying like, all right, everyone talks about how bad Hitler is, but like, look, and come on, the Soviets are pushing in from the east. We've got most of France by now. It's like, come on.
Their GDP was huge, though. They were taking so many. That's the other problem with, because David Satter says the same thing, and I fully hear him, because like David Satter's life has been dedicated to this. Putin has killed his friends. I love David. He's a very good friend of mine. But like, at the same time, like, Hitler was taking the whole, the Sudetenland. He had Poland within his reach. He was going to be going west. Like, his GDP, they were humming now, coming out of the Great Depression, if you will. Early years there that affected everyone around the world. Like, there was a real economic impact there. Whereas when I look at the situation now, and I certainly have like a lot of questions about China and how much of that might even be overdone, like, China's GDP is more concerning, because I think the numbers from like 2020 were like 19 to 17 trillion, like US, China, whereas, you know, Russia's farther down the list. Again, don't want to discredit or discount a problem. We see Russia killing people on British soil with polonium. I mean, they're very, very reckless.
All of this hadn't happened yet. When I started worrying about the possibility of a Russian attack.
Yes.
So the things that kept me awake at night, my worst fears came true. Is what I'm saying.
Yes.
Now, maybe it could have been worse. Okay, maybe it could have been worse, but the thing is, it's just that. Well, I think you get what I'm saying.
I do.
It was. It's worrying because it has not been always fun or easy, because I have been widely ridiculed and like made fun of, and like you've had your experience with like angry commentators and everything. It's like, it's not always fun being in the public space talking about ideas that are not widely accepted. And
I
also-
appreciate that you do it and you walk right into it. You say what you say. You lay out your case. You're very matter of fact about that. I admire that a lot.
Well, thank you, and I really appreciate you reciprocating and like having me on to talk about this. I mean, you, I guess, kind of like you guys did kind of ridicule my theory on your show, and I reached out. And I said, listen, it's like let's talk about it, and now we're talking about it,
Yes.
and that's great because that's what I want to do. I want to like engage. I want to talk about this case, but I also want to talk about how do we talk about this case? How do we engage? You had this guest on. He had this theory. It was pretty bonkers. He was very confident. And that is not ultimately how you fix a broken watch.
Correct.
You know, you've got to be like, you've got to
to
have
be
all the
open.
pieces lined
Yes.
up on your towel, and we have to go through and talk about it. Now, am I sure that the spoof theory is correct? No. Is it possible that the pilot took it and went south? Yes. But we need to, I think that there's sort of my mission here is not to convince people that this is what happened to the plane. Although I think it is an interesting story in itself. And I'm a journalist. I like interesting stories. And like the twists and turns in this case are like pretty
Yeah, you got that made for you on this one.
right?
Yeah.
It was made to be entertaining. I think it was literally made to be entertaining. Like shoes kept dropping. It was like a serial where there's twists and turns and cliffhangers and all that. But I think it's important. We live in this age in the last 10 years, and YouTube is a big part of it, frankly, where everybody can say anything. And how do you sift the wheat from the chaff? How do you separate the noise from the signal?
It's hard.
And I'm here kind of to sit at your knee and learn, because I do think that, like, you know, we've been talking for, I don't know, maybe a couple hours or something.
Hours, yeah, something like that.
And we've kind of just scratched the surface, but we've already told much more information than they were able to get across in the Netflix documentary.
Yes.
Now, if you said to me before I was involved in that project, if you have 3 hours to talk about MH370, can you get the gist of it across? I would say, yeah. I think I can. But then once you start to actually lay out all those pieces on the towel.
Yeah, there were so many different narratives in there.
So many different narratives and parts. Well, they also spent a lot of time beautifully, I think, you know, it's sort of invoking the grief of the family members. But then they also spent an entire episode talking about Florence to Changy, who I think is just a case study in how not to talk about this case.
Can we actually, if we're on it, can we go to that right now?
Yeah.
So she came up when Ashton was in here too. What was he was saying? He talked to her or something. I don't even remember.
French lady.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then he was. What was he saying, Alessi?
I think he said something in regards to he'd reached out to her and he said that it was shot down. And then we were going back and forth being like, oh, your theory, it doesn't make sense because, she
was denying.
She was
that,
denying it.
yes.
He was saying, oh, he completely denied it. And then we were like, wait a minute, all the articles are saying that this is what she said.
Right, and she said it herself on the documentary, which could be taken out of context.
Yeah.
But then she wrote a whole book on it.
Exactly.
Wait, she's denying that she said the plane was shot down?
Yeah, so she was, and this is, because again, you can be taken out of context on cameras. I know, that's why we film this like so direct so that people don't ever have that happen, and we talk for 3 hours, so it's like you get it out there.
Right.
But like when people are editing a documentary or something, I mean, you can do a lot with words. I mean, I'm sure you saw that from some of your own cuts.
I've been on both ends of that.
So when she says something like that, I hear it. And then she writes a, 400-page book laying out this theory and then saying, oh, I never did that. Yeah, are my red alarms going off? Yes, they are. And they weren't for Ashton, so we had a disagreement there. But she laid out the theory on the documentary, but can you at least like run through that again just so people who aren't familiar with the documentary will understand what she was trying to say?
I confess I have not read her book, so my knowledge of her specifics is limited. The long and short is that she thinks that the Americans shot it down over the South China Sea, and that everything that happened after that was like made up. If you have a theory, you want to have, on the one hand, positive evidence supporting it, and you want to have an absence of negative evidence making it, ruling it out.
How did she get the AWACS like as a piece of evidence?
So I've heard people claim that there was some kind of U.S. military exercise going on.
Yes.
Nobody's really. I mean, if it was my theory, I would like try to get people on the ships to talk to me about it, or at least pin down that, like, I don't know, the deployment of naval ships can't be that secret. I mean, it's a massive thing with hundreds of people on board. It's like I haven't had to do it, so, but there was, as far as I can see, no attempt to kind of validate her claims. I mean, based on the Netflix documentary, it seems like a major piece of evidence is somebody that she can't name told her in a parking garage.
Yeah, it's always tough these days with anonymous sources.
Yeah. So she doesn't really have any compelling evidence for, and she has a lot of compelling evidence against, namely all of the Inmarsat data, all of the debris that washed up in the Indian Ocean, which we haven't even talked about.
We're going to get to that in a minute.
Okay. But I don't know why they put her in this show. It doesn't, I mean, I know why they put her in the show. They wanted to make it seem like there's a lot of possibilities. And I think that's an instinct that a lot of people in the mainstream media have. And it's a bad instinct because it's not correct. There's not that many things that could have happened to this plane.
Thank you guys for checking out this clip. If you haven't already subscribed, please subscribe and hit the like button on this video. It is a huge, huge help. And if you'd like to check out this clip's full podcast episode, that link is in the description below or right here. And finally, you can follow me on Instagram and X by using the links in my description below.